Well, welcome back to Great Mondays Radio. I am Josh Levine, your host, and with me today is the amazing Cori Schauer. She is the Director of Customer Experience at the DC Public Library. Cori is someone actually I've known for a long time professionally and have had the opportunity to work with. And I'm really excited about some of the stories that she has to share. So Cori, welcome. Thank you for coming on, and tell me a little bit about your background, what you do, what's your experience in what does customer experience have to do with culture?
Thank you, Josh. It's so great to be here. Thank you for having me. Yep, I'm Cori Schauer. I'm the Director of Customer Experience at DC Public Library. My background is in user research and service design, which I've been doing for about many years, at a wide variety of places like NASA, where I got to work in human spaceflight, which was just a hoot and a half, and I can tell lots of stories about that and culture. I worked at Mozilla. I was at Dropbox for a while. I worked for the city of San Francisco, and I worked a lot on cannabis. So we can talk about that if you want. And patient experience also for the city of San Francisco. And now I am here in DC. So customer experience and culture have a lot in common. They go hand in hand a lot, because if your company culture is not focused on customers, yet you are focused on customers, it's hard to deliver to your customers if your staff don't want to do that, which is kind of what's happening at the library. So we can talk about that too.
Yeah. So one of the things that I like to get into is kind of your culture origin story, right? If you're a culture superhero, what was that moment, if you can think back to where you realized that culture played a role, that culture was important, became important to you in the work that you do?
Well, culture, I mean, aside from being a culture anthropology major, so culture is always at the forefront of my work, but from a company culture perspective, I was actually introduced to that quite early on. During grad school, I had interned at both eLab in Chicago and then Studio Archetype in New York, and both of those design agencies were then purchased in the very beginnings of the .com era by Sapient. And Sapient at the time was like one of the premier web design and technology firms in the late 90s and early 2000s. And they had a very strong company culture. And so when we all merged together, we created this new and improved culture. And it was how you lived. It had a book. It had, there were values, and these values were how you were evaluated. Your performance was evaluated by those values, and not just annually, but quarterly. So if you got bonuses, also at the end of every project, the project was evaluated by every individual on the project as well as the client. And that was all done by the values. So the clients got to say whether you were living the values throughout your project. And then that kind of all leveled up to your performance reviews. And so bonuses and other things were attached to how you lived those values. So it was very early on in my career that I was very aware of what company culture was, what it meant, what it could be, when it went well, and how it worked, and how it felt when it was good, and then how it felt when it was like not good. So I've kind of seen both sides of that. But I would say so pretty early. Yeah. It was always part of how I shopped for jobs too.
Oh, really? So you were like, okay, this makes sense to me. And then you internalized that and used that as a filter.
Yeah, exactly.
Looking for the right company to join.
Exactly. I think, Sapiens was a little extreme, I will say. I don't know if you need all that kind of evaluation, but I will say that it did promote a certain way of thinking around, our values were around openness and creativity, things that matched my personal value system. So it worked well for me, but it made me aware of the purposefulness around a company and what it wants to be, and that there is work involved in that. And so when I looked around at other places to work, I was always looking for, well, how do we talk about ourselves? What are the expectations around how we are together? And that's important for me, is how are we together? And, you know, some places have it and some places don't. And I've worked in both. So, you know, I've seen both sides of that.
So you started in the kind of the quintessential tech company, right? Like you got that experience and you've been around in next to kind of these tech organizations for a long time, but you have pretty deliberately worked, it appears to me, and you can tell me, you know, how you kind of started, but you've worked in, I don't know if you call it public services or government. Why did you choose to do that briefly? And maybe that's culture related or not, but more importantly for me, and what I'm interested in is, what would you say, how would you compare the way that a private, creative, tech or tech company engages with this idea of culture or not, and a governmental service or public services does or not? Benefits, challenges, what could we learn from that?
That's a great question. So I moved away from the tech industry very purposefully in 2016 after working at Dropbox, which is kind of the, you know, the quintessential, you know, tech startup that's really big, about to go public, kind of getting its act together, but has a lot of resources. I mean, it was just swank to be there. It was a lovely place to work, but it wasn't fulfilling for me in the sense of what I was working on. It's not that the problems weren't challenging or that it wasn't interesting work. It was, but I wanted to be of service to my community in ways that I had not been before. I was always in service of customers, or in service of making money, or in service of a board, for the most part, except for my time at NASA, which was a totally different story. But I purposefully went looking for a job in government, and especially local government, so that I could be of service to my community and bring the skills that I have forward. When I moved into the government space, I went to the city of San Francisco, and I first worked in the Department of Public Health and Patient Experience, and then I went to the digital services team, and actually worked for the Office of Cannabis through the digital services team. And the challenge, I think the biggest difference between company culture in the private sector and then culture in the public sector is really about resources and so money, you know, and then probably the way you hire, right? And the functions of government versus the functions of a private sector company. Private sector companies are there about, first of all, they're about making money. Let's be real about that. They're about making money.
Yeah.
They're about answering the needs of a specific audience or set of audiences, and then the board, if they have one, right, which they usually do, or shareholders. And there are a lot of tensions at play there, but that's what you're really doing. You're putting a product out, or a set of product or services out into the world for people to purchase and use. And so when you have private sector work, you can build the company culture you want, because you typically would have the resources to do so. So you can put money towards it. You can put people towards it. In government, you can't and don't do those things very often. Government is really there to serve the needs of the residents of a place. They answer all sorts of needs across the board, whether it be health or safety or zoning and planning and building. I mean, there's a million and one things that your local entities are doing for you. and probably serving you in ways you don't even know, that are both, feel very imaginary and then feel real. Like, for example, if your garbage doesn't get picked up, if you happen to be in a place where, your government does garbage, like mine, or as San Francisco, it was paid, right? When I used to live there. And so, you've got all these things that it has to do. And so when you work for a government, you typically have a lot of employees that do a lot of different things and have a lot of different experiences and backgrounds. And so you're not hiring always from like the Stanfords or the Yales or the big Ivy League schools to be able to do your development work. You may be hiring in a different way because you have laws and legislation around how you hire, right? Which is great.
Mm-hmm.
San Francisco has one of the best equivalency hiring laws around, you can have a degree or you can have the equivalency work years, which I think is excellent. So, there's a lot of ways that is, but then that means though, that you've got people from all different walks of life working in the same place or the same spaces. So for me, working in, the DC Public Library, I've got people from all over the place, from all different backgrounds, and experiences that come together and work in this place. And they don't have the same belief systems or come from an already narrow, way of living or working or being.
Right. That you saw at Dropbox pretty regularly.
Right. It's more,
you come in with a certain set of assumptions and you understand how we work. In tech, it's like, here are the things. You want to be efficient and you want to do this thing. And we start from a basic set of assumptions. And what you're telling me is in government work, it's like we're just bringing in, and we might bring great people in, talented people in. Doesn't have to be from a top tier school, but there's a set of assumptions and life experiences that are much more diverse.
And right, correct. And the salary ranges are different and the expectations are different, and people have, differing opinions about what their job is. Some people just, a job is a job is a job, and some people a job is a career. It really runs the gamut in government work. So when you're creating culture in government work, I think it's harder to do because you have to think about all these different parts and pieces and different things coming together in one place. But you also, I think, once that comes together, though, I think you have it's not homogenous, right? It's very solidly strong. So when people come together and co-create and agree on what they want their culture to be, I think you have what's the right way to put it? I think it's going to be stronger. I think it's going to be longer lasting, but I think it takes a lot more to build.
Right.
More buy-in is required.
Right. So in a sense, the difference is there's kind of already a culture. I mean, I guess, I would argue that whether you're working on it or not, you have culture, right? Your company has a culture. So there's probably, when you're thinking about a private company or a company in particular industry, there's a base set of assumptions, and you're probably going to work in a certain, there's like a range that you're going to be your kind of culture. You can shift and change and adjust that, but you're going to start with something and it's going to be pretty functional maybe. But here you're saying, I don't know, like it could be anything, the range of possibilities of how this works. And that means that it has a lower bottom, right? Which is like, it could just be, people just like, I'm not even interested in working with you, right? We have no shared purpose. To what you're saying is, if you do get it together, if you're able to invest that kind of energy to reduce the entropy and increase the directionality, that it actually might be more resilient and successful, powerful, let's say.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, yes, that's a good succinct way of saying all the things I just said.
That's my job. So let's talk a little bit about the work that you're doing right now at the DC Public Library. You are the director of customer experience. That's why you were hired. And yet you are now essentially the figurehead of the work, the culture work that's happening there. Can you tell us a little bit about like how that happened and
Yeah,
where you got into it?
sure. Yeah, that is true. I came to be the first director of customer experience that the DC Public Library has ever had, and I have yet to really put forward a full customer experience program because we've been focused on culture work as well as then, of course, our very solid interlude with COVID, and I was working on reopening strategies for COVID for 3 years basically,
Right.
but. Yeah, so my first year here, I came in 2019, and you know, as a good researcher, designer type person would do, the first thing I did was go interview everybody that I could. And over that first year, I actually interviewed 276 people in person across the system out of 600 people. So it was like,
Amazing.
you know, more than a third of the
If
agency.
there's
Or
one thing we can
about.
say about Cori, it's that she's thorough.
Right, exactly. I went and talked to anybody who would sit down with me. I went to every branch. I wanted to understand, you know, I don't come from libraries, and libraries are special and beautiful places,
Yeah.
but they didn't operate the way that I expected them to, or at least DC Public Library doesn't.
Yeah.
I think I had this like very different understanding of how libraries work, and I got here and was realizing, oh wow, there's so much process and much of it is jumbled. And we're a quasi-independent agency, which means we get to make up a lot of our own rules. We don't have to follow all of the district rules all the time. And that was tangled, and I wasn't sure how that works. And as I went around and talked to everybody, I was doing these like kind of, you know, quarterly, research reviews with the executives and telling them my findings. And really what was coming forward is that aside from the fact that nobody is customer focused, and we're a very staff focused agency, we have a lot of challenges. And one of the biggest challenges was that people didn't have a shared vision of what we do. Libraries, especially public libraries, tend to be the kitchen sink of all things. We're kind of like the gap filler for all government stuff. If you got a question, go to the library. People will help you. Those nice librarians will help
Right.
you, right?
You're going to run into somebody who's willing to try to at least try.
To help you, right?
Right.
So, you know, it was clear that nobody really had a shared understanding of what we do. So that's that shared purpose. Nobody had a shared purpose. And with that, there were no values that were shared that underpin how we are together and why we're doing this shared work together. So at the same time as that, there was a formal HR assessment being done externally by a consulting group, and it did a bunch of interviewing, and they did all the HR, you know, all the like formal review of all the process and stuff, and basically came up with the same problem. And so when that came forward, we agreed, okay, yes, culture, we need to work on it, and we need to create, in particular, we need to create a purpose and values. And I raised my hand and I said, I'd like to lead this work. Is that possible? And they were like, yeah, new person, sure thing.
Sure, dummy.
Right, here you go. And that was at the end of 2019, going into 2020. And I was just revving that work up right when the pandemic happened. And then we kind of had to figure out how to do that work in the midst of a really scary time. And so we kind of put it on pause for most of 2020, picked it back up at the end of 2020, going into 21, and then kind of have been sailing ever since. We created our purpose and values. We co-created them. They were created by our staff, and a representative group of our staff that across the agency built those together. And we launched that to all staff during when did we do that? June of 22, I think. And then we followed that up with a series of culture conversations, which were much more focused and in-depth conversations across the agency. We had 14 of those. And that then kind of rolled into, what to do next. We had a couple of culture roadmaps. We did rewards and recognition. We did a strategy around that, which frankly has just been sitting there. So that's one of those moments where if you don't have somebody to hand it off to that's as excited as you are, I guess that's one of my failure moments of find your internal allies that are just as excited. No, you can. I cannot, and I am one person among 600 people. We all need to carry this culture together.
Yeah.
I'm happy to shepherd, but I can't shepherd forever. Especially since that's actually not my role. Right. I need to actually do my day job plus this, but that's actually, and so my customer experience work suffers in a way for that because I'm not focused on it. But my thought was, if we have a solid culture, and part of that culture and part of those values is about how we treat not only each other, but also treat our customers, then I can start working on flipping us from being staff focused to customer focused. So it was a little bit selfish to do it, but that's how I thought about it.
All right. So you had the gift of not only your own primary research, but also this other HR assessment to say, hey, people don't understand what's going on here and they don't have a shared sense of values. And you went, oh, great, we're going to create a purpose and values. But what is the goal? Why was that important? What were you trying to, or what was the importance of this? What were you trying to achieve? And how far along that path have you gotten? I mean, you've just launched them a year ago, right? So it's been a couple years. It takes time. It's a process. So what are you trying to, for those listening who are like, sure, it would be nice to have some values. Sure, it would. That sounds like a nice to have, but you spent your time and energy, because you felt like it was important. What did you want to achieve? Have you achieved it? Is there something else that came up that benefit? Maybe is there a sort of a surprise benefit to having done that?
Well, as I said, selfishly, I wanted to be able to move us from being customer or, towards being customer focused rather than looking at our navels, and we do a lot of navel gazing.
Right.
And I wanted to be able to look up, look out, and really understand that there's more to our work than just us and how we feel about it. And so that's how I wanted it to go. I think the values that we created in a way are a snapshot of time for where we are right now. I think some of the values are gorgeous. There are 5 of them. They're gorgeous, but they're also basic. Our first value is about give and get respect. And in many places, you don't even need to say that. It's just there. But in our agency, that's something that we have to say to each other. And what does that look like and feel like? And how do we live that together, right? And that's what the culture conversations have been, is the actuality of living that. And this is something that people probably can guess about libraries and librarians and library staff members, is that they're very detail-oriented people and they like to know all the things. So one of the reasons we did the culture conversations, and we'll continue to do more work on this, is because people want specific examples of how this work, how their values show up in their everyday work, how they can use the values in different situations. They truly need and crave this detailed set of explanations and scenarios and practicing, which kind of blew my mind. I was literally like, but you're adults in the world. Do you not live in the world and not understand don't you? I felt it was a little, this may sound jerky, but I felt like some of the things we were coming up with were fairly commonsensical.
Give and get respect.
But that's when I realized we have so many people from so many different backgrounds and so many different experiences. And also We've been studying and bringing in trauma-informed care into our work, and realizing that everybody has trauma in their lives. And so how we process trauma and think about trauma, and how trauma is triggered and then re-triggered by things that one thing may not mean anything to me, but could trigger you,
Right.
right? And
Right.
so, because I don't know something that happened in your life, and the next thing you know, you're not able to respond in a way that I would think to a very what seemingly simple situation for me is triggering for you. And bringing that work into how we think about our values has been completely eye-opening. So that's what we've been doing
Mm,
this year,
mm,
is combining trauma-informed care principles with our values and matching those up, and being able to then rewrite and rethink all of our scenarios so that we're able to live our values while caring for ourselves at the same time, and then having empathy and holding empathy for one another.
mm.
And that, that's so powerful. And aside from needed, it's just so powerful to have written down and put in a book, and be allowable and also expected, right? And so, overall, the response is good so far, but we have a long road. It's going to be a while. I'm going to have to chip away at this over time.
Right.
And people deal with things in different ways, and they think about the agency in different ways. And so, it's just going to take me a bit to figure out how to get that all out there in the right ways.
I'm so happy that we talked earlier about all the kind of can use the term diversity, or all the different kinds of people that are showing up here, because that's really feeding into this. We need to create a deeper understanding of what is expected of us, and we need to create a deeper understanding of one another's experiences, because like you said, there are things that wouldn't even occur to you that would be problematic. And I would suggest that probably the Dropboxes of the world would do well to also have this conversation.
Yes, everybody has trauma, everybody. And you don't know what's happening in your coworker's life all the time. You may know what's going on in your close friend, close coworker's life, or you may think but you
Right.
don't know, right?
Yeah.
And so I think trauma-informed care, especially after the pandemic, we are all carrying the weight of the pandemic. We've still got weight on our shoulders from the pandemic. There's also weight of the
Absolutely.
world, right? We've got crazy things going on in Ukraine. We've got an election pending. We've got climate change. There's all these very deep and heavy things.
Yeah.
We've got a lot of divide in our country, racism, there's just you name it, right? All these deep things that are weighing on all of us, and having tools and frameworks that you can use to help your staffs, be able to care for each other and themselves in smart ways is just a win-win, right? And then you couple that with values. You can't go wrong. I think it
Yeah.
would be hugely beneficial for all the private agencies to get on board with trauma-informed care. Public sector has been doing this for a while. It's new to the library, to our library system. It's not new to libraries, and it's definitely not new to healthcare.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Right. So when it comes to advice for other, let's say, not just libraries, but you obviously have a deep experience, but let's say public services or government or governmental organizations, if there's someone that's listening to this, what would, and they believe that culture is something that can make a difference, can improve the way that people inside their organization work together and deliver these services, improve the customer experience, perhaps even. Do you have a piece of advice? Do you have some suggestions, like where, I don't know, or observations even, right? Like, what should a person in this position do? Where do they start?
Well, ultimately, I guess it depends on your role in the agency or the organization that you work in, right? If
Of
you're
course. Yeah.
if you're at a level at which you are a decision maker and are able to affect change, I would suggest you go straight to your bosses, your top C-level people, and start talking. And say, hey, listen, I have this idea about culture and culture change. I think that it would be great for us to explore this. There are so many resources out there to be looking at for culture work. I would read your book. I have a copy
Read my
on my
book. That's
shelf
number
right
one.
now.
Go
Yes,
and buy Josh's book.
that's
Right. Okay.
right.
Fair.
No, truly number one. I mean, it's a great book, and it's actually a true on how to do this work, step by step.
Yeah.
So it's been a guide for our team for sure. But I think it's a matter of like being able to say, hey, this this culture has opportunity for being better. We can serve each other better, which means if we're serving each other better, we can serve our customers better. And I think that and I mean, there's a lot of proof in that too,
Mhm.
already out there money wise. I mean, just look at all the work that Joie de Vivre has done over the years to think about when you care for your staff, your staff will care for their customers, and you've got this great
Mhm.
hospitality going. It's
Right.
all
Joie de
that
Vivre is the
Airbnb,
hotel. Joie de Vivre
right?
is the hotel
Right. Chip
group.
Connolly,
Yeah.
right?
Chip
Connolly,
Conley.
yeah,
Yep.
who
Yep.
then went to Airbnb and did that host experience for Airbnb, and that whole. I mean, he proved that he made money
Yeah.
on that mantra, right?
Yep.
So, I think that that would be my first thing to do, is to do that. I would also start asking around, hey, can you define our culture? What is it? What are we? Who are we? What do we do? Don't look at the website. Don't look at the mission statement. Tell me,
Right.
what do we
What is it
actually
actually?
do?
What is the
Right.
actual culture?
And then the other thing is ask yourself, well, what do you want it to be? Right? How do I
Mm,
want to feel when I'm at work? How do I want things to be at work? How do I want to solve
mm.
problems while I'm at work? How do I want to collaborate with others? And start asking those questions to everybody around you. And then that's how my work kind of started, was in that space. And then, if you've got some findings around that, take that to the C-level. If you're not C-level, then bring it to your boss. If you can't do the company, do your team.
Yep.
Create some nice,
Yep.
like I like to design alliances with teams, and that's a coaching technique, but it's the way that you openly set expectations of how we are together. When we are together, we will be this way. We'll have our meetings between this time and this time. We will respect each other by XYZ. Somebody will need to have their camera off because whatever. We'll have hybrid meetings, whatever it happens to be that we need. But then
Yeah.
it's like the logistics and then the how we feel together. I want to leave
Mhm.
this meeting feeling energized. I don't want just to give you updates. I want to be inspired. I want to whatever. That you can just start with your team
Yeah.
and live that in a team space, and then you can kind of grow out from there.
Yeah. It's about providing your team with what they need to do their best work. Of
Exactly.
course, there's sort of the humanity of, it's great to be nice to each other. I'd love for you to leave with more energy. There will be hard days. This is how we will survive those hard days. But at the end of the day, how do you put in the kind of energy, resources, support so that the people on your team can do their best work? And what you're describing, right? The first part of the system of designing a culture, purpose and values, establishes that expectation. Here are the things that are important, that are critical.
That's right.
Give and get respect. And listen, even if you're not actively a disrespectful person, to keep that front and center
Right.
is so critical. And so these are the tools that are really important.
Yeah. Hey man, you're spending all your time at work. You might as well be happy there.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. You might as
So
well get more than money if you can, right? Like
absolutely.
that's the point. So,
Exactly.
and you can provide more than just your hours.
That's right.
So
Exactly.
that's great. Amazing. Cori Schauer, the Director of Customer Experience at the DC Public Library. You can check out the newly relaunched website that she was also part of doing at dclibrary.org. It has been amazing to talk to you. Thank you so much for being a guest and a great partner, because we've done some of this work together, and
That's
I
right.
really value that. So thanks, Cori. It was really great to have you on Great Mondays Radio.
Oh, thank you so much, Josh. Thank you. It was a pleasure. And it's always a pleasure to work with you. Thank you so much.